The world sees the spotlight first, the roaring arenas, the flawless guitar solos, the smile that never seems to crack. For decades, Keith Urban has stood under blinding stage lights as one of country music's most electrifying performers. A man whose fingers move faster than doubt, whose voice carries both grit and tenderness. But at 58, something feels different. Not broken, not fallen, just heavier. Because what happened to Keith Urban isn't a scandal. It isn't a collapse. It's the quiet reckoning that comes when a man who once outran his demons finally slows down enough to hear them breathe. Urban built his life on movement. Born in New Zealand, raised in Australia, obsessed with American country records, he chased Nashville long before Nashville knew his name. He slept in uncertainty. He played in near-empty rooms. He watched doors close more often than they opened. When success finally arrived in the late 1990s and early 2000s, it came like a storm, fast, loud, overwhelming. It stacked up. Awards followed. Crowds grew. But so did the pressure. Fame magnifies everything. Talent, yes, but also fear. Urban has never hidden his battle with addiction. Long before the stadium tours, alcohol and drugs had already begun tightening their grip. Even after marrying Nicole Kidman in 2006, the struggle didn't magically disappear. In fact, just months into their marriage, he checked himself into rehab. Imagine that vulnerability. A newlywed global superstar admitting he needed saving. Many relationships would have shattered under that weight. Theirs didn't. Kidman once described those early days as painful but transformative. Urban later admitted that sobriety wasn't just about staying alive. It was about becoming worthy of the life he had built. At 58, he carries nearly 2 decades of recovery behind him. That's the part people rarely see. Recovery isn't cinematic. There's no dramatic final scene where the hero conquers the monster forever. It's a daily choice, a quiet discipline, a constant awareness that the past never fully disappears. It waits. And then there is time. When you are young and famous, time feels endless. Tours blur into each other. Albums arrive every few years. Reinvention feels exciting. But as Urban approaches his late 50s, the arithmetic changes. The industry is younger. The algorithms are colder. Trends move faster than guitar riffs. Country music itself has evolved into something hybrid, sometimes unrecognizable from the sound that first inspired him. Yet he still steps on stage. But lately, fans have noticed something: longer pauses between songs, deeper breaths before certain lyrics, a gaze that lingers a little longer into the crowd. It isn't fatigue, it's awareness. The awareness of a man who understands that every performance could be one of the last at this scale. Urban has spoken about anxiety before shows, that strange contradiction of loving performance while fearing irrelevance. Imagine standing before 20,000 people and still wondering if you are enough. At 58, those questions don't vanish. They evolve. They become quieter but sharper. And then there's fatherhood. Urban and Kidman share 2 daughters. In interviews, he has described how becoming a father reshaped his definition of success. Awards stopped matching the same way. Chart positions felt temporary. What mattered was being present, emotionally sober, physically there, spiritually grounded. But touring still demands distance. Fame still demands exposure. Privacy becomes a luxury. Aging in public is a rare burden. The audience freezes you in your prime. They remember the 35-year-old guitar hero, the magazine covers, the effortless charm. But the mirror tells the truth. The body slows. The voice requires more care. Friends in the industry begin to fall ill. Some pass away. Mortality stops being abstract. So what happened to Keith Urban at 58? He didn't implode. He didn't disappear. He began to reflect. There is something profoundly emotional about watching a man who once lived at the edge now choose steadiness. A man who once risked losing everything now fiercely protects what he has. The tears people speak of aren't triggered by tragedy. They're stirred by resilience, by the realization that survival, when sustained over decades, is its own quiet miracle. At 58, Keith Urban stands not as a fallen icon, but as a man fully aware of the fragility of the life he fought to keep. And sometimes that awareness, that gentle, unspoken gratitude, is more powerful than any guitar solo. There's a moment that happens to performers who survive long enough to see generations change. It doesn't arrive with headlines. It doesn't announce itself with scandal. It arrives quietly, backstage, in hotel rooms, in the silence after applause fades. At 58, Keith Urban has entered that moment. For most of his career, he ran toward the noise. The crowd was oxygen. The lights were fuel. Nashville was a battlefield, and he fought for every inch of ground with blistered fingers and relentless discipline. When the hits came, "Blue Ain't Your Color," "You'll Think of Me," "Somebody Like You," they cemented him as more than just a skilled guitarist. He became a fixture, a name that meant reliability, energy, heart. But longevity comes with a strange emotional cost. Urban has spoken in interviews about the fear of complacency, the terror of becoming a legacy act rather than a living one. In an era dominated by viral 30-second clips and streaming statistics, artistry can feel secondary to data. For someone who built his reputation on musicianship and live connection, that shift isn't just professional. It's existential. At 58, the question isn't, "Can I make it?" It's, "Do I still matter?" That question cuts deeper than people realize. There's also the physical reality. Touring at this level is punishing. Late nights, travel across time zones, the strain on voice and body. Urban is known for explosive stage presence, sprinting across platforms, bending into guitar solos as if the instrument were an extension of his nervous system. But stamina changes. Recovery takes longer. Injuries linger. He doesn't announce it publicly, but the body keeps its own quiet record of decades spent under hot lights. And then there's perspective, the kind that only comes from almost losing everything. Addiction nearly dismantled his life once. Sobriety rebuilt it, piece by piece. But recovery also rewires how a person sees success. Fame becomes fragile. Applause becomes temporary. What endures is the discipline to stay steady when nobody is watching. Urban has described sobriety as clarity, sometimes painfully so. Without substances to numb anxiety, every fear is sharper. Every insecurity is louder. The industry's shifting landscape. The pressure to evolve without betraying authenticity. The awareness that youth, in entertainment especially, is currency. But perhaps the most emotional transformation at 58 is his role at home. Urban is no longer just a rising star or the industry veteran. He is a father to daughters who are growing up fast. He is a husband to one of Hollywood's most recognizable actresses. Marriage in the public eye requires insulation, protection against rumors, narratives, constant speculation. Over nearly 2 decades, his relationship with Nicole Kidman has survived the scrutiny that destroys many couples. Yet even strong foundations require maintenance. Urban has hinted in conversations that maintaining intimacy while balancing global careers demands intention. Time must be carved out deliberately. Fame tries to consume identity. Family restores it. At 58, he appears less interested in proving dominance in charts and more invested in emotional presence. There have also been quieter heartbreaks. Watching peers age, losing mentors, seeing legends struggle with illness. When you're young, mortality feels theoretical. In your late 50s, it becomes personal. Each loss recalibrates your priorities. Fans sometimes mistake reflection for decline. But reflection is not weakness. It is awareness. Recent performances reveal something subtle, gratitude woven into every chord. When Urban thanks audiences now, it feels slower, more deliberate, as though he understands that the privilege of still standing there, sober, married, performing, is not guaranteed. The phrase, "try not to cry," suggests tragedy. But what unfolds at 58 isn't collapse. It's vulnerability. Urban has acknowledged in interviews that anxiety still surfaces before shows. That old whisper, "What if this is the night? I'm not enough?" The difference now is that he doesn't run from it. He plays through it. He channels it into strings and lyrics. That's growth. That's survival. Financial security, awards, and status cannot silence internal dialogue. They never could. What changes at 58 is how a man answers himself. Instead of chasing validation, Urban seems to be choosing intention. Instead of running from fear, he acknowledges it. And perhaps the most emotional truth is this. The version of Keith Urban the world fell in love with, the high-energy guitar hero, still exists. But alongside him stands a quieter man, one who has outlived his chaos, one who measures success and stability, one who understands that staying sober for 20 years may be the greatest encore of all. The tears, if they come, are not for a fallen star. They are for a man who nearly burned out and chose not to. At 58, Keith Urban is not fighting the industry anymore. He is guarding his peace within it. And that battle, though invisible, may be the hardest one he has ever won. There is a specific kind of silence that follows survival. It is not the silence of defeat. It is the silence of awareness. At 58, Keith Urban lives inside that space. A space earned through mistakes, redemption, reinvention, and time. The younger version of Urban was fueled by hunger. He wanted Nashville to accept him. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted to prove that a kid from Australia could master the language of American country music better than those born into it. That fire created excellence. It also created pressure. Every album had to outperform the last. Every tour had to grow bigger. Every performance had to justify his place. But when you survive addiction, fame, and the fragility of early marriage, ambition changes shape. Urban has hinted that what frightens him now is not failure, it is imbalance. He knows what it feels like to tip too far into chaos. He knows how quickly momentum can turn destructive. That awareness makes him cautious in ways fans may not see. He guards his schedule. He structures his touring. He protects his sobriety like oxygen. Sobriety at 58 carries a different texture than sobriety at 38. In his 30s, it was about repair. In his 50s, it is about preservation. There is less drama now, but more responsibility. Younger artists look at him as proof that longevity is possible. That example is heavy. When you become a symbol of resilience, you cannot afford visible cracks. And yet, the emotional cracks still exist. Urban has spoken about imposter syndrome, the persistent whisper that perhaps he doesn't fully belong among the giants of country music. Despite Grammy wins, despite decades of chart success, that doubt hasn't disappeared. It has simply matured. At 58, doubt sounds less frantic, but more philosophical. Have I said everything I need to say? Is there still something urgent left in me? That question touches every artist who ages in public. The music industry rarely celebrates aging male vulnerability. It celebrates youth, dominance, reinvention. But reflection? That is quieter, harder to market. Urban's recent interviews carry more introspection than bravado. He speaks about gratitude, about still being here, about the strange miracle of waking up sober, healthy, and able to play. Health itself becomes a central theme at this stage of life. Touring demands stamina. Vocal cords require maintenance. Sleep becomes sacred. Urban's energy on stage remains electric, but it is now sustained by discipline rather than pure adrenaline. There is intention in every set list, strategy in every rest day. He no longer burns himself out to prove anything. Then there is his marriage to Nicole Kidman, a partnership that has endured Hollywood's relentless glare. Two global careers operating simultaneously is not simple. There are premieres and tours, filming schedules and recording sessions, award seasons, and family commitments. At 58, Urban seems deeply aware that stability at home is his anchor. He has described Nicole as someone who believed in him even when he doubted himself. That kind of loyalty leaves a mark. Urban's daughters are entering formative years, the stage when they become aware of who their parents are in the public eye. That transition can be destabilizing for celebrity families. Urban appears determined to normalize what he can. He has mentioned wanting his children to see him not as a rock star, but as a present father. That redefinition of identity may be the most emotional shift of all. Because when the stage lights go dark, applause does not follow him home. What follows him home are ordinary moments, dinners, conversations, laughter, occasional tension. Fame cannot protect you from domestic reality. In many ways, it complicates it. Urban's awareness of this tension feels stronger at 58 than ever before. He knows that the legacy he leaves behind will not be measured solely in platinum records. There is also the broader cultural shift. Country music has expanded, blended with pop, hip-hop, electronic textures. Urban has adapted throughout his career, but adaptation grows more delicate with age. Move too far from roots, and you lose core fans. Stay too fixed, and you risk irrelevance. That balancing act requires emotional intelligence as much as musical skill. Recent performances show the man leaning into authenticity rather than spectacle. Acoustic moments linger longer. Stories between songs feel more personal. He seems less interested in dazzling and more invested in connecting. That transition often signals maturity, the shift from performer to storyteller. The phrase, "try not to cry," resonates not because of tragedy, but because of recognition. Recognition that the man on stage has walked through darkness and emerged steady. Recognition that aging, when embraced honestly, carries dignity. Recognition that survival can be profoundly moving. Urban at 58 is not a cautionary tale. He is a testament that addiction does not have to define the ending. That marriage can survive public storms. That fame can coexist with humility. That reinvention does not require self-erasure. But beneath that strength remains something deeply human: fear of time, fear of losing relevance, fear of physical decline, fear of not being present enough at home. These fears do not vanish with awards. They sit quietly beneath gratitude. And perhaps that is what makes this chapter emotional. He is no longer racing toward the future. He is walking through it with intention. Each tour could be fewer than the last. Each album could carry more reflection than experimentation. Each thank you to the crowd could carry the weight of understanding how rare longevity truly is. At 58, Keith Urban stands not at an ending, but at a crossroads between legacy and living. The tears, if they come, are not for what he lost, but for what he kept. And sometimes, holding on is the bravest performance of all. There comes a point in a long career when applause no longer defines you. It simply accompanies you. At 58, Keith Urban appears to be standing at that exact threshold. The roar of the crowd still rises when he walks on stage. The guitar still sings beneath his hands. But something internal has shifted. The performance is no longer about conquest. It is about meaning. For decades, Urban operated in forward motion. Each album cycle was a climb. Each tour, a test of endurance. Success required relentless output. In the early years, slowing down meant disappearing. But longevity rewrites that rule. At this stage, restraint becomes power. Urban has hinted that he now evaluates projects differently. Instead of asking, "Will this dominate the charts?" he seems to ask, "Does this feel honest?" That subtle pivot signals maturity and risk. Honesty can be quieter than spectacle. It can alienate fans who expect the same formula. But it can also deepen connection. There is also the internal negotiation between identity and legacy. For many artists, the fear of being remembered only for past hits can be paralyzing. Urban's catalog is strong enough to sustain nostalgia tours indefinitely. He could easily live inside his own greatest hits. Yet he continues to release new music. That decision speaks to a refusal to fossilize. Still, the awareness of time remains. 58 is not old by ordinary standards, but in entertainment, especially in a genre increasingly shaped by youth culture, it invites comparison. Younger artists emerge with fresh sounds and viral momentum. Algorithms reward novelty. Urban's challenge is no longer survival. It is relevance without desperation. And desperation, he knows, is dangerous. His history with addiction taught him what happens when pressure becomes overwhelming. Sobriety trained him to recognize early warning signs: exhaustion masked as productivity, anxiety disguised as ambition. At this age, the stakes are different. He is not fighting to be discovered. He is fighting to stay balanced. Balance, however, is fragile. Urban's marriage to Nicole Kidman has long been portrayed as one of Hollywood's more stable partnerships. But stability does not mean ease. Two high-profile careers inevitably collide with logistical strain. Coordinating filming schedules with tour dates requires precision. Raising daughters under public scrutiny demands vigilance. Privacy must be defended deliberately. At 58, Urban seems acutely aware that family is not a backdrop to his career. It is the foundation beneath it. In interviews, he has described the comfort of returning home to normalcy, the grounding effect of domestic routines, the relief of being known beyond headlines. That grounding may be his greatest protection against the industry's volatility. Yet even with stability, there's the emotional weight of aging publicly. Fans who first discovered him in the early 2000s have grown older alongside him. Their lives have changed. Their priorities have shifted. Urban's music now serves not only as entertainment, but as a soundtrack to shared decades. That realization carries responsibility. Each lyric becomes a bridge between past and present. Recent live performances reveal a more contemplative presence. During acoustic interludes, Urban often pauses, not theatrically, but thoughtfully. He looks out at audiences with something resembling gratitude mixed with disbelief, as though he understands that careers like this are statistical anomalies. Not everyone makes it this far intact, and intact may be the key word. He has not escaped hardship. He has not avoided internal battles, but he has avoided collapse. In an industry littered with cautionary tales, that alone is remarkable. Many artists who reach their late 50s carry scars that are visible. Urban scars are quieter, internal, managed rather than displayed. The emotional undercurrent at 58 is not sorrow. It is clarity. Clarity that health cannot be assumed. That time with family cannot be postponed indefinitely. That creativity cannot be forced. That audiences can sense authenticity instantly. This clarity softens his public persona. There is less urgency to impress, more willingness to connect. He has also begun speaking about mentorship, about supporting younger musicians, about collaboration rather than competition. That shift from competitor to guide marks another stage of maturity. It reflects security. Insecurity breeds rivalry. Security encourages generosity. Still, beneath the composure, there remains the human question: what comes next? Will the next decade bring fewer tours, more studio work, a pivot toward production, a quieter life? Urban has not outlined a grand exit strategy, but the way he speaks now suggests intentional pacing rather than abrupt departure. The phrase "try not to cry" lingers because it hints at fragility, but the fragility here is existential, not catastrophic. It is the fragility of understanding that nothing lasts forever. Not fame, not youth, not physical stamina. What remains is the character built during survival. Urban at 58 is defined less by chart positions and more by endurance. Less by spectacle and more by substance. He is not chasing immortality through excess. He is building legacy through steadiness. And perhaps the most emotional realization is this: the man who once risked losing everything now protects everything with fierce awareness. His sobriety, his marriage, his fatherhood, his craft. None are taken for granted. There are no dramatic headlines attached to this chapter. No explosive revelations. Only a gradual, dignified transition from relentless ambition to mindful presence. In many ways, that transition is harder than collapse. Collapse is sudden. Reinvention is noisy, but sustained maturity? That requires discipline every single day. At 58, Keith Urban stands in that discipline. Not fading, not retreating, not unraveling. Simply choosing deliberately who he wants to be in the years that remain. And sometimes, the quiet decision to remain whole is the most powerful story of all. There is a difference between surviving your past and confronting your future. At 58, Keith Urban is no longer haunted by who he used to be. He is challenged by who he is becoming. For much of his life, forward motion was instinctive. When doubt appeared, he worked harder. When pressure mounted, he pushed louder. When temptation whispered, he ran toward distraction. But maturity removes escape routes. The older you get, the fewer illusions remain. You begin to see patterns clearly, especially your own. Urban has often described music as therapy, but therapy evolves. In his 20s and 30s, songs were outlets for chaos. In his 40s, they were anchors of stability. Now, in his late 50s, they feel almost archival, reflections of a life already lived. That awareness carries emotional weight. Because once you begin measuring your life in decades rather than dreams, perspective shifts. The industry still spins relentlessly, but internally, there's a slower clock ticking. The urgency to prove fades. The urgency to preserve intensifies. Urban's continued sobriety remains central to this chapter. Nearly 20 years without relapse is not luck, it is vigilance. Addiction does not vanish with age. It waits for exhaustion. It waits for complacency. Urban knows that. That knowledge makes him disciplined in ways fans rarely notice. Structured routines, accountability systems, careful boundaries. He has admitted that the temptation to numb stress never completely disappears. What changes is the response. At 58, he no longer views vulnerability as weakness. He acknowledges it. That quiet honesty is perhaps the most profound transformation of all. Then there's the question every artist eventually faces. What is enough? Enough tours, enough albums, enough applause, enough headlines. For someone who once chased validation across continents, enough is a radical concept. Yet recent interviews suggest Urban is exploring it. He speaks about gratitude more than ambition, about time more than trophies, about presence more than performance. His daughters are approaching adulthood. That reality alters the emotional landscape. Childhood moves quickly, especially under bright lights. Urban appears aware that these years cannot be replayed. Touring schedules can be adjusted. Growing up cannot. Marriage, too, evolves. Nearly 2 decades with Nicole Kidman means navigating multiple seasons. Early intensity, public scrutiny, professional peaks, private valleys. Longevity in relationships requires reinvention just as careers do. At 58, Urban seems less concerned with grand romantic gestures and more invested in sustained partnership. Stability, after all, is not glamorous, but it is powerful. Professionally, the temptation to compete with younger artists must surface occasionally. The charts reflect changing tastes. The industry rewards novelty. But Urban's continued relevance has come not from mimicry, but authenticity. He adapts without abandoning core identity. That balance becomes harder with age and more essential. There's also a physical dimension that rarely gets discussed openly. Touring bodies age. Recovery times extend. Voices require maintenance. Even subtle shifts in stamina can be emotionally confronting for performers who built their reputation on energy. Urban stage presence remains dynamic, but behind it is likely a meticulous regimen. Vocal care, physical training, disciplined rest. Aging in public is an unusual psychological experience. Fans often freeze artists in their prime. They remember the breakout single, the breakthrough performance, the moment lightning first struck. But the artist continues evolving privately. That disconnect can be disorienting. Urban's current stage demeanor reflects someone who understands his paradox. There's less frantic movement, more grounded confidence, less urgency to dominate, more willingness to connect. He seems comfortable occupying space rather than conquering it. The emotional resonance of this phase lies in restraint, in choosing peace over excess, in choosing balance over burnout, in choosing longevity over intensity. He has also begun speaking about mentorship, offering support to emerging artists navigating fame's volatility. That shift from competitor to guide is significant. It signals security. It signals a desire to contribute beyond personal gain. Yet beneath the composure remains the universal human fear, mortality. Not in a dramatic sense, not in illness or crisis, but in arithmetic. 58 means more years lived than left in youth. That awareness sharpens decisions. It encourages reflection. It deepens gratitude. Urban has lost peers, watched icons age, witnessed careers derail. Survival brings perspective. The fact that he remains healthy, creatively active, and sober is not something he treats lightly. The phrase, "try not to cry," resonates here because the story is not about downfall. It is about growth without spectacle, redemption without relapse, success without self-destruction. In many ways, the most emotional truth is that Keith Urban did not become the stereotype. He did not flame out. He did not implode under fame. He chose discipline, repeatedly. And repetition is not dramatic. It is steady. It is quiet. It is daily. At 58, he stands at an emotional intersection between legacy and living. He has enough achievements to retire comfortably, enough credibility to coast, enough respect to avoid scrutiny. Yet he continues creating, not to prove relevance, but to express it. That distinction matters, because when ambition transforms into intention, something powerful happens. Art becomes less about applause and more about authenticity. Life becomes less about accumulation and more about alignment. Urban's journey at 58 is not tragic. It is tender. Tender because it reveals a man aware of fragility. Tender because it highlights discipline over chaos. Tender because it shows that aging can be dignified rather than dramatic. The tears, if they come, are for recognition. Recognition that survival is sacred. Recognition that stability is earned. Recognition that staying whole in an industry built on excess is its own quiet victory. At 58, Keith Urban is not fading into memory. He is refining his presence, not chasing immortality, not fearing irrelevance, simply choosing, day after day, to remain grounded. And sometimes, that quiet choice is the most powerful encore of all. If you'd like, I can continue with part Sal, moving toward the emotional culmination of this story. If the earlier chapters of Keith Urban's life were about survival and reinvention, this chapter feels like reckoning, not with scandal, not with collapse, but with legacy. At 58, the question is no longer whether he can succeed. He already has. The question is what his success ultimately means. For years, Urban measured progress in milestones: record sales, awards, sold-out arenas, critical acclaim. Those markers build a career that many artists only dream of. But achievement, when sustained long enough, eventually forces a deeper inquiry. When you have climbed the mountain repeatedly, you begin to ask why you're still climbing. Urban's recent interviews suggest he is wrestling with that very thought. There is less adrenaline in his tone, more reflection. He speaks about gratitude more than goals, about balance more than ambition. It is the language of a man who has realized that constant expansion is not the same as fulfillment. The truth is, fame is loud, but meaning is quiet. Standing on stage, guitar strapped across his chest, Urban still commands attention. The crowd sings every lyric. Phone lights shimmer like constellations. But when the final note fades and the arena empties, he returns not to chaos, but to stillness. And in that stillness, the real questions surface. How long do I want to do this? What do I want my daughters to remember? What does a life well-lived look like from here? Urban has always been transparent about the discipline that sobriety demands. At 58, that discipline becomes even more sacred. Recovery is not a chapter that closes. It is a daily practice. The music industry remains an environment saturated with temptation, late nights, celebrations, exhaustion. But Urban no longer treats sobriety as a fragile shield. It has become part of his identity, a foundation rather than a fence. That transformation is emotional because it represents something rare, growth without relapse. In an industry where many artists burn bright and vanish, Urban has endured. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but intact. That intactness carries a quiet dignity. His marriage to Nicole Kidman continues to anchor him. Nearly 2 decades together have reshaped both of them. They have navigated career peaks, parenting pressures, relentless media attention. At 58, Urban seems less interested in public displays and more invested in private stability. Love, at this stage, looks less like fireworks and more like steadiness. There is something profoundly moving about that steadiness. Because in his younger years, chaos was never far away. Addiction hovered like a shadow. Self-doubt crept in between applause. The future felt uncertain even at the height of success. Now, certainty comes not from guarantees, but from perspective. Urban understands what he nearly lost. That awareness changes everything. Fans often expect dramatic revelations when they hear "Try Not to Cry." But the emotional impact here is subtle. It lies in watching a man choose sustainability over spectacle, in watching someone age without bitterness, in watching ambition soften into wisdom. Urban has also hinted that the next decade may not mirror the last. Touring might become less relentless. Creative output might become more selective. Time at home may take precedence over constant travel. These are not signs of decline. They're signs of recalibration. Recalibration requires courage. The entertainment industry rewards momentum. Slowing down can feel like surrender. But Urban appears to understand that intentional pacing is not surrender. It is strategy. It protects health. It preserves relationships. It extends creativity. And perhaps most importantly, it protects identity. Because beyond the Grammy Awards and platinum albums, Keith Urban is simply a man who loves music. That love existed before fame. It survived addiction. It endured reinvention. At 58, it feels pure, stripped of desperation. When he performs acoustic sets now, there's an intimacy that wasn't always present in earlier years. The songs feel lived in rather than projected. The connection with the audience feels conversational rather than performative. It is the difference between proving and sharing. Urban's emotional arc at 58 is not about loss. It is about clarity. Clarity that time is finite. Clarity that health is fragile. Clarity that family cannot be postponed. Clarity that relevance built on authenticity outlasts trends built on hype. He stands in a rare position. Successful enough to walk away, passionate enough to stay, wise enough to choose carefully. That crossroads is emotional because it represents freedom. And freedom, after decades of pressure, can be overwhelming. What happens when you no longer need to chase? What happens when you realize you have already won? For Urban, the answer appears to be presence. Being fully present on stage, fully present at home, fully present in recovery, fully present in gratitude. There is no tragic downfall here, no shocking confession, no dramatic unraveling. Instead, there is something quieter and perhaps more powerful, a man consciously shaping the final decades of his career rather than letting the industry shape him. The tears, if they come, are not for what happened to him. They are for what didn't. He didn't self-destruct. He didn't abandon his family. He didn't lose himself entirely to fame. He endured. At 58, Keith Urban embodies a different kind of strength. Not the explosive energy of youth, but the steady resilience of maturity. And as he steps into whatever comes next, fewer tours, deeper music, more family time, he does so not as a fading star, but as a grounded man. The spotlight may still shine. The applause may still roar. But the real victory is invisible. It is the quiet knowledge that he survived long enough to choose how the story continues. There is a moment at the end of certain concerts when the music stops, but the crowd refuses to leave. The lights stay low. The air hums with something unspoken. The artist stands still, taking it in, not as a conqueror, but as someone aware that nothing lasts forever. At 58, Keith Urban seems to understand that moment more deeply than ever. This chapter of his life is not defined by scandal or tragedy. It is defined by awareness. The awareness that the years behind him are now as significant as the years ahead. The awareness that survival is not an accident. The awareness that legacy is not built in one explosive season, but in steady, disciplined decades. Urban once chased greatness with relentless urgency. He had something to prove, to Nashville, to critics, to himself. But that urgency has softened into intention. He no longer appears driven by fear of irrelevance. He appears driven by gratitude. Gratitude for sobriety. Gratitude for family. Gratitude for still being able to step onto a stage and feel the electricity of connection. Addiction once threatened to steal everything. It nearly dismantled his career, his marriage, his identity. But at 58, sobriety is not just a victory. It is a foundation. It is the invisible architecture holding everything upright. Every performance, every lyric, every interview carries the quiet subtext of a man who knows what it means to almost lose it all. There's something profoundly emotional about that kind of endurance. Because endurance is not glamorous. It is repetitive. It is disciplined. It is choosing the right decision over and over when no one is watching. Urban's life now reflects that repetition. The routines that protect his mental clarity. The boundaries that shield his marriage. The conscious pacing of his career. His partnership with Nicole Kidman has become one of the most stable narratives in an unstable industry. Two global careers running parallel without collapsing into chaos. Two public figures protecting a private core. At 58, Urban seems less concerned with proving romance and more focused on sustaining it. Stability, once fragile, is now deliberate. Then there is fatherhood, perhaps the most transformative role of all. His daughters have grown up watching their father on massive stages, yet he has often spoken about wanting them to see something more ordinary. A present parent, a consistent figure, a steady voice. That desire reshapes ambition. It redefines success. The truth is, fame does not guarantee fulfillment. It amplifies everything, applause and anxiety alike. But Urban appears to have found a rare equilibrium. He still performs with energy, but without desperation. He still creates, but without self-erasure. He still evolves, but without abandoning his roots. The industry continues to change. New artists rise rapidly. Trends accelerate. Attention spans shrink. Yet Urban stands as proof that longevity is possible without spectacle-driven reinvention. His authenticity has become his currency. And authenticity ages well. At 58, he is not trying to be younger than he is. He is not clinging to a former image. Instead, he seems to embrace the maturity that comes with perspective. His stage presence now carries warmth rather than urgency. His interviews carry reflection rather than bravado. His music feels lived in rather than projected. There's also a subtle emotional gravity in watching someone who once battled internal chaos now embody calm. The younger Keith Urban radiated intensity. The 58-year-old version radiates steadiness. That steadiness may be his greatest transformation. The phrase, "try not to cry," resonates because the story is unexpectedly gentle. No dramatic collapse. No shocking revelation. Just a man who walked through fire and chose not to burn. Urban's journey is not about decline. It is about evolution. The evolution from performer to storyteller. From competitor to mentor. From reckless ambition to intentional presence. As he moves into the next decade of his life, the path ahead feels less like a race and more like a curated journey. Perhaps fewer tours. Perhaps deeper albums. Perhaps more time at home. The choices now are guided by alignment rather than pressure. There is beauty in that freedom. He no longer needs to prove his worth to charts or critics. His catalog speaks. His longevity speaks. His sobriety speaks. His marriage speaks. His fatherhood speaks. And when he steps onto a stage now, it feels less like a battle for relevance and more like a celebration of continuity. The final emotional note of this story is simple but powerful. Keith Urban did not become a cautionary tale. He did not implode under fame. He did not surrender to addiction. He did not sacrifice everything for applause. He stayed. He endured. He matured. At 58, that endurance is more moving than any headline could ever be. Because in a world that rewards extremes, explosive rises and dramatic falls, there is something quietly heroic about stability. The lights may eventually dim. Tours may slow. Applause may soften. But the man standing beneath those lights today is not fragile. He is grounded. And sometimes the most powerful legacy is not the loudest one. It is the one built slowly, carefully, intentionally over time. Keith Urban's story at 58 is not about what happened to him. It is about what didn't. He didn't lose himself. He found balance. And that, perhaps, is the most emotional encore of all.